I am an African. I owe my being to the hills and the valleys, the mountains and the glades, the rivers, the deserts, the trees, the flowers, the seas, and the ever-changing seasons that define the face of our native land. My body has frozen in our frosts and in our latter-day snows. It has thawed in the warmth of our sunshine and melted in the heat of the midday sun. The crack and the rumble of the summer thunders, lashed by startling lightning, have been a cause both of trembling and of hope. The fragrances of nature have been as pleasant to us as the sight of the wild blooms of the citizens of the veldt. The dramatic shapes of the dragon's back, the soil-colored waters of the Likwa, Iqeli, Notugel, and the sands of the Kalahari have all been panels of the set on the natural stage on which we act out the foolish deeds of the theater of the day. At times, and in fear, I have wondered whether I should concede equal citizenship of our country to the leopard and the lion, the elephant and the springbok, the hyena, the black mamba, and the pestilential mosquito. A human presence among all of these, a feature on the face of our native land just defined, I know that none dare challenge me when I say I am an African.
It was a poignant moment. Who will ever forget this speech? Of course, today is Africa Day. Happy Africa Day to everybody out there. Of course, it's not, well, there's a question we're asking today with regards to Africa Day, specifically in South Africa, Elvis.
Specifically in South Africa, because Africa Day is not a public holiday in South Africa. We're going to ask that to the minister as well a little bit later. But Jumbo Africa to all of you out there as we celebrate Africa Day today.
Yeah, on the 25th of May, 1963. That's when the Organization for African Unity was founded. Of course, later became the African Union. And this day is celebrated all over the African continent, except here officially as a public holiday. So that's the poll we put up. You guys have been voting. You've been voting us since early.
We're asking you that question: should Africa Day be declared as an official public holiday in South Africa? So far, 112 votes in, 65% of you are saying yes, it should be declared a public holiday. Is that because we just love a public holiday, or are you passionate about being African?
Well, this is what Ntateng tells us. No, I think we have too many holidays and people don't use these holidays as a way of learning.
Hamer says we have enough public holidays as it is.
Adam Banda says, obvious some surprise why it's not a public holiday. Yes, Adam, we're the only country on the continent where it's not a public holiday.
Monjalo says, yes, so we can protect without losing protest, without losing our jobs. Why? Because we have a holiday?
Is what it is. Anyhow, keep tweeting us, guys, at SABC Newsroom. Of course, this is this year's theme. It's the year of OR Tambo, building a better Africa and a better world.
But we're also asking a question here, and that focus really is still on Africa Day, on the African continent and what we're going through as a continent. We're always seeing there's a perception that Africa is always dire, there's always war, there's always famine.
Yeah.
But is this perhaps something else?
They say, they've been telling us for the last 5 years that the economic outlook for the next 10, 50 years is very positive. So we ask you, will this be the African century? Will it be that mythical idea come to fruition?
We have that resource called human capital on this continent, which is waiting to be resourced.
Yep. Anyhow, keep tweeting us there. Have we got tweets? We've got a couple of tweets on. Will it be the African? Unati tweets us. He says, I don't think so until we stand together and do things in our own ways. Talking about Africa Month.
Lubuyo says, we all Africans, aren't we?
That's correct. Yeah, keep tweeting us. Interesting, guys. Interesting stuff. Anyhow, there's a lot of stuff to get through today. We've got an official program starting at 10 o'clock this morning with the celebrations. Let's get into the headlines.
Africans are urged to be united as the continent celebrates Africa Day today. The Independent Electoral Commission in KwaZulu-Natal has confirmed that the IFP is leading in the by-elections in Ngutu in the north of the province. And Northwest Police have arrested over 30 protesters in connection with the hostage drama involving the mayor of the Ditsobotla municipality, Daniel Buthelezi. That's almost like running onto the Bastille in France, yes? They stormed the building and captured the mayor. But that's what we have for you in the news. But before we get there, let's find out from Kendall Makamate what's happening on the sports front. It was a glorious night for the Red Devils.
Glory, glory, Man United. That's, you know, I took a lot of abuse from all these Liverpool people around and smacking me about supporting this team. And of course.
Finally won something worth talking about.
It's the third trophy this year.
Yeah,
three.
You should have seen Mourinho running around the field with it, holding it like a child. Cradled in his arms, very happy. And congratulations to you and all other Manchester United fans out there in the world. Good morning to you. As you can see, my colleagues are ecstatic about some of the sports from yesterday. But it seems that they've forgotten one or two things that also happened yesterday. This is what we've got for you in the sports today.
Oh, he's definitely going now, A.B. de Villiers. But has he gone? Gone. He has gone. Big wicket, huge wicket.
The Proteas' preparation for the ICC Champions Trophy gets off to a shaky start in Leeds as England dominates them with bat and ball in their first ODI yesterday.
Now it's 0% chance of South Africa winning.
Sundowns come away with it. Vilakazi, can he finish it off? Still Vilakazi! Sundowns have got a third!
Mamelodi Sundowns come back from the Lions' den in the Congo with 3 points after beating AS Vita 3-1 in their CAF Champions League group stage match.
Pogba just behind it. It's Smalling's header. It's the second goal for Manchester United. And it's put in by Henrik Mkhitaryan.
Manchester United's Paul Pogba and Henrik Mkhitaryan helped their team outclass Ajax Amsterdam to win an emotional Europa League final 2-0.
Manchester United are UEFA Europa League winners 2017.
As you can see, a massive night of sports we had last night. More details at 10:40. For now, it's back to Elvis, who's got the news.
Thank you, Kendall. Top story this hour. Africans, you are urged to be united as the continent celebrates Africa Day today on the 25th of May. It's a glorious day for Africa.
The dialogue of all 54 African nations celebrate Africa Day. This time the continent will celebrate the 54th anniversary of the OAU. President Jacob Zuma is expected to address the commemoration events in Pretoria. The PAC says it said that despite attempts to unify Africa for half a century, it's still not a permanent member of the UN Security Council. It also lamented the fact that the AU is funded by foreign donors.
We want to see this day being a public holiday in South Africa. It's the day that the founding fathers of the African struggle, liberation struggle, such as Kwame Nkrumah and all the Pan-Africanists, had a very great ideas about it. They wanted to see a united Africa with one government working for the African people.
Even though the day is not a public holiday, many people commemorate it across the country.
We must be proud of where we are coming from.
I want to see everybody united as like a rainbow colors, and I want to see all the people from different cultures being together.
Africa is the only place in the world that I can be proud to be an African and not to be called a foreigner, called different names or what.
It's a celebration of us as a continent, is it not? I myself am not too big on it. My wife loves it. It is where obviously everyone dresses in their national heritage clothes.
The PSC says the AU needs to fast-track efforts to unite the continent and do away with colonial borders. Muntlengeni Dipoku, SABC News, Johannesburg.
And the question is, how are you celebrating Africa Day today? Now, Africa Day is the annual commemoration of the 25th of May, 1963. That was the foundation of the Organization of African Unity, or the OAU. It's now known as the African Union, or the AU. The event is celebrated in various countries on the African continent as well as around the world. The organization was founded by 32 countries. A further 21 states have joined gradually over the years, with South Africa becoming the 53rd member on the 23rd of May, 1994. President Jacob Zuma will today host the National 2017 Africa Day celebration at Isafalco Makato Presidential Guest House in Pretoria. This year's theme is the Year of O.R. Tambo, building a better Africa and a better world. The Minister of Arts and Culture, Nathi Mthethwa, now joins us in our studio in Pretoria. Minister, Jambo Africa, a very good morning to you.
Morning and morning to viewers.
Minister, what is the significance of celebrating Africa Day in South Africa?
Well, it should be significant for the whole of the continent, which it is, and the people in the diaspora, especially because it was a day, a significant day, where the OAU, the Organization of African Unity, was formed, and basically taking forward the wave of liberation struggle on the continent. But as we reflect on the 25th of May 1963, we should take stock of what would have brought about that day and what was the context upon which the day itself came into being. You'd remember the dreaded Berlin Congress of 1884-85, which partitioned the whole of the continent. And at that time, you were seeing the emergence of African intellectuals across the continent, and people were starting to talk about means and ways of resisting that, and actually decolonizing even at that point. You'd remember in South Africa, for instance, the first political organization was formed in 1882 in Mbumba, Africa, under Tengo Jabavu. So these things, together with the contribution of people like W.E.B. Du Bois, Henry Sylvester Williams, leading to the first Pan-African Congress in London in 1900, to the framing of a progressive Pan-Africanism by Pixliga Isakasem in that very important seminal work of his in 1906 on the regeneration of Africa. All these together, and with the formation later of the ANC, and leading to the very formation of the OAU itself, tells a story of a people who have been moving forward in search for social progress and ensuring that indeed liberation reigns on the continent Africa. So we pay tribute to all those of our forebears who made that contribution and who had the edge that Africa should be decolonized. And indeed, OAU played its role. You would know that almost all the countries and the states on the continent are free, perhaps with the exception currently of Western Sahara, which is still being occupied by a neighboring country, which is Morocco. But the rest of Africa, the dream of our forebears was realized. What is facing Africa today is the emancipation economically. And that's what the generation currently has to face with, and ensure that indeed, in the true spirit of O.R. Tambo, because as you alluded to, this year is the year of Oliver Tambo, because he would have 100 years had he lived. A true internationalist, I couldn't think of any person who would have held this dream for Africans beyond the OAU's formation than O.R. Tambo, because he trotted the globe like a true African colossus, spreading unity amongst the African people and becoming a mouthpiece of the liberation movement throughout the world, especially in the South nations, Asia, Latin America, Africa, and so on. So it is a fitting tribute to reflect on the life and times of this giant in line with his views and perspectives about Africa being free.
Mm-hmm. Now, on that theme, Minister, the theme for this year, the year of O.R. Tambo, building a better Africa and a better world, but then the question remains, why is Africa Day then not celebrated as a public holiday here in South Africa?
Well, what is important is that we should do everything in our power, first and foremost, to raise national consciousness amongst our people about the day itself. You can have it as a holiday, but if you don't understand what it's all about, remember that South Africa was a pariah state for a very long time. And because of that, even today, we are still working on the mindset of South Africans who would not sometimes feel as part of the great continent, Africa. So we commenced then in 2015 with this process of deepening this consciousness amongst our people. Today, it's better than it was 3 years ago because there is a conversation about the Africa Day. There's a conversation about Africa because unity is the bedrock upon which OAU was formed. We need, therefore, to spread this word to the people of South Africa that South Africa is part and parcel of the continent. So there is no need, for instance, to see any African anywhere else on the continent as a foreigner. And that, for us, would be more beneficial for us as South Africans, more than just declaring a day as a holiday. Mm-hmm. So we are on this path, we are on this journey to ensure that indeed the paradigm is shifting. People understand themselves more as Africans, because the question of identity is quite crucial.
Mm-hmm. Now, we're asking our viewers today, Minister, whether or not, if they look at this day today, whether Africa will be the century where we will shine above all others. But what do you see as some of the greatest challenges facing the African continent to achieve that?
Look, we have challenges on the continent, and we have opportunities as well. Challenges, the fact that firstly, we still have, as I said, Western Sahara or the Sahrawi people not enjoying the fruits of liberation is one drawback. The fact that you still have wars, and with the AU Agenda 2063 of silencing the guns on the continent, it's still some of the challenges. Poverty, underdevelopment. These are some of the issues which are faced with the generation of leaders today on the continent. But as you know, that there are also opportunities. The first one relates to the fact that the current generation of leaders have crafted the Africa Rise narrative through the AU Agenda 2063, which speaks of the Africa we want, a prosperous Africa, an Africa which is going to be experiencing economic growth so that her children finds a better life and development. Africa who today, out of 10 fastest growing economies in the world, 7 of them are found on the continent Africa. So you have both opportunities and challenges, as it were, but the very fact that there is a compass upon which society or the peoples of Africa are pointed to with this Vision 2063, we are hoping that Africa is going to rise, Africa is going to face challenges and will be able to soldier on to ensure that the second phase of transition, which is about economic emancipation, is realized in our lifetime.
Minister, I thank you so much for your time and joining us, and happy Africa Day to you.
Thank you so much.
That was the National Minister of Arts and Culture, Natim Tetwa, from our Pretoria studios. And of course, we're asking you that very important question. It's a question, and of course, we're also relating to the poll. The Minister says there's issues that we need to look at in terms of that holiday. We can give you that holiday, but what are you going to do with it if you're not aware or educated about what Africa Day is all about? So let us know, what do you think on the poll in relation to the question, do you think that Africa Day should be a public holiday here in South Africa? But let's move on to other stories. We'll come back to some of your comments in a short while. The Independent Electoral Commission in KwaZulu-Natal has confirmed that the IFP is leading in the by-election in Ngutu in the north of the province. Celebrations have started as early indications show that the IFP has won more wards than any other party. Party members have taken to the streets celebrating the party's performance. IFP supporters took to the streets in the early hours of the morning in celebration. Joyous supporters praised the party, saying their lead proves that the IFP remains a force to be reckoned with. The Ngutu by-elections followed the dissolution of the municipality in February after it failed to elect office bearers due to political squabbling. For more on this story, we now cross to our reporter Ayanda Mshlongo, who is at the IEC Centre in Ngutu, where the vote counting is still continuing. Ayanda, very good morning to you and welcome.
A very good morning to you too, Elvis.
We hear and we understand that the IFP is leading so far. Can you confirm that?
Well, Elvis, from the early hours of this morning, around it must have been around 2:30, the IFP had already started celebrating here in the town of Ngutu, and that is because of the results that they were getting from their party agents. We were able to speak to the IFP leaders at that time, who said, according to the information that they'd had and the results coming in from the voting stations, was that the IFP had won 14 wards of the 17 wards that were being contested here in the Ngutu municipality. Of course, they did stress that we would still have to wait for the IEC to officially announce those results. We are here now at the IEC Centre here at the Ngutu municipal offices, where in just a few minutes, in about 30 minutes time, the IEC will then hold a media briefing where they are going to then announce the results. Also, we will then again get the opportunity to find out how the other parties fared. But from what we have from the IFP and the IEC has said, but without giving details, is that yes, indeed, the IFP is in the lead, and it looks like the IFP has won by a landslide victory, Elvis.
What is the mood like there in Ngutu this morning? What are the people of Ngutu telling you?
Well, Elvis, we've been up throughout the night. The IFP supporters have been celebrating all night, and their celebrations are continuing. In fact, as I'm talking to you now, I can see the IFP motorcades. They've been going around the town here. IFP supporters on foot, a joyous mood. The IFP members are saying that they are more than happy. They worked really hard for this election. You remember, Elvis, that of course the IFP in the 2016 local government elections, they had in fact won 15 seats, and the ANC 14, the NFP 2, and the other smaller parties a seat each. The IFP this time, according to the information or the results that they have given to us, is that in addition to the 10 wards that they'd won in the 2016 local government election, they've managed to increase those wards by 4. We are also hearing that number could go up to 15 wards, but of course we will then know that once the IEC announces. But I can tell you out here, Elvis, in the streets of Ngutu, the IFP supporters are out in their numbers. They are celebrating this victory. They're saying it's a hard earned victory. They worked really hard, and they have not only maintained they maintained their position here in the Ngutu municipality, but they also feel that they are now going to be able to rule or run this municipality alone.
Did the victory come as a surprise? Because the ANC bigwigs were there. The president was there himself, as well as from the EFF, Julius Malema, the commander-in-chief.
Well, certainly, Elvis, I'm sure for the ANC, this must be quite a knock. The ANC invested a lot of time, a lot of effort into this election, as you said correctly, bringing in down some of their top leaders, including President Jacob Zuma. We also saw many of the other top 6 leaders of the ANC also campaigning, NEC members. The provincial leaders of the ANC even practically lived here in this area, as they've been campaigning day in and day out. The EFF, I beg your pardon, also, yes, they've also been campaigning here. The Democratic Alliance, the NFP, all were very optimistic about how they would fare in this election. In fact, the ANC had said that it was just a formality. They had said that they were sure that they were going to win. However, the people of Ngutu have spoken. Yesterday was their day, and if that the decision that they have taken is that they are giving their vote and trust to the IFP. The ANC, as we understand it, is going to hold a press conference as well, so we will also just be finding out from them what their reaction is to this loss.
That's our reporter. Thank you so much, Ayandam Shlongu, coming to us live from the IEC Centre in Ngutu. We'll get the results a little bit later. They'll have that media briefing at 10 o'clock. We'll keep you updated. The Northwest Police Commissioner, General Bayile Mochwanyane, has commended his team for successfully securing the release of the Ditsobotla Municipality Mayor Daniel Buthelezi and 2 of his bodyguards after a long hostage drama. They were taken hostage by a group of angry residents who stormed the municipal offices in Lichtenburg and set the building on fire.
In what could be described as a Mexican standoff at the Ditsobotla municipality in the northwest, council offices were engulfed by a blaze amid a hostage drama. A mayor and his disarmed bodyguards were held in this building. A high police contingent was deployed, including the reaction unit.
Big balls of smoke and clouds of white smoke came out of this side of the building. The first flames just came out. Petrol bombs were thrown. People were screaming.
The police battled for hours to convince the group to release the hostages. However, just after 1 o'clock this morning, the group were seen coming out. Negotiators were able to lure them outside to minibus taxis and then pounced.
We have managed to secure the mayor unhurt. The mayor is safe. The bodyguard to the mayor, all 3 of them are safe. And no suspect in the hostage process who is hurt.
But family members of the suspect are accusing the police of using excessive force.
We are having a very skilled police officials, of which all the forces they were called in, as you saw what happened. And I'm very much grateful to say that we managed to handle the situation.
Meanwhile, on the streets, some residents were demanding the release of those arrested. Police say the suspects will appear in court later this week for formal charges. Tsolofelo Matibedi, SABC News, Lichtenburg.
Now that's your news for now. Now we focus on Africa Day today. It's a glorious day, the 25th of May, 1963. That was the date when the Organization of African Union was started and later became then, of course, the African Union. As we speak today, we focus on that day, Africa Day. Let's go over to Evan to take a look at the trends.
Yeah, obviously it's a national holiday in every African country except South Africa. So we thought we'd put up a poll to kind of gauge opinion, how you guys think about Africa Day. Should it be a public holiday here in South Africa? Should it be declared as that? And you heard the views of the minister a little bit earlier talking at length. It's not about a holiday. It's about understanding what it means to be African and what it means to do African. 2/3 of you of 140 votes are saying, yes, declare it as a public holiday. That's 2 out of 3 so far. That's what you have. It's a majority. This one from Bongani, he says to us, I don't think it would be appropriate. We can't be celebrating African unity while they're busy abducting our sisters. Harsh, but true. Ikona Natsos tells us, we've got many public holidays in this country, but as we are Africans in Africa, why not? What makes us different unless we are not? Unati Grootboom, I won't celebrate anything until we know who we are. We must find our own identity, then we can celebrate. Newsroom. And this one from Christine Mumalu, who says, yes, it should. We're African. Are we not? To the point. Keep it coming. Tweeting us. That's where we are. It's Africa Day today. At 10 o'clock, we're going to have the official program kick off here today, so we'll be live there. But let's have a look at what you should be looking at on social media right now, what is happening on the social pages. We'll start, of course, with Africa Day, a happy Africa Day. That's also hashtag Africa Day today. Of course, the foundation of the OAU, or the Organization of African Unity, now known as the African Union, on the 25th of May, 1963. It's celebrated in various countries on the continent and promotes unity and growth in Africa. This image comes from Yusuf Abramji and is captioned, say no to xenophobia, say yes to peace, say no to dictatorships. That's on Africa Day. Then all is calm in Diekkloof this morning after a protest broke out there yesterday, allegedly over housing. Hashtag Diekkloof protest is where you can see some pictures and interact with what's been going on there the last 24 hours. There's still a lot of talk, of course, about Karabo Mokwena's alleged killer, whom she had a relationship with. Hashtag Sandile Manchwe, who's denied killing his 22-year-old girlfriend. He's expected to appear for his bail application in court in June. Moving abroad, Manchester, well, ISIS has now claimed responsibility for the attack in Manchester. However, investigations are underway as to why Salman Abedi, the 22-year-old British-born child of Libyan refugees, got involved in terror activities. Several other arrests have also been made to gather more information about an alleged syndicate thereon. Well, 22 people are confirmed dead, many of them young people, teenagers, and even younger. According to the bomber's sister, he wanted revenge for the deaths of children in Syria. Then, investigations are taking place following an explosion in Indonesia's capital, Jakarta. One police officer died after 2 suicide bombers attacked a bus station there. Hashtag Jakarta. Now, let's move on and have a look at our picture of the day. This one comes from Ramabulana Chioma. And of course, he's talking about the sad death. He says, saddened by the passing of such an indispensable asset to his Piet Bielefeld. Sad, sad indeed, he says. Now, a comment of the day comes from the Basta 003, who says today we celebrate Africa Day. 54 years ago, 32 African countries met to form the OAU. Let's work to ensure a brighter future for all Africans. That's what we are talking about. That's our tweet of the day. Our courts, the courts have been busy of late, haven't they? Let's take a look at the court diary and see what are the cases of interest today in the Northwest, where 32 protesters who were arrested in connection with the hostage drama involving the mayor of the Ditsobotla municipality. Well, they're appearing in court there today. The protesters bombarded the municipal offices in Lichtenburg late yesterday and held Daniel Buthelezi hostage. They face charges of kidnapping, attempted murder and arson. Then in Durban, the murder accused, Sean Rooster Pillay, is due back in the regional court in preparation for his trial. Pillay is accused of killing Vijay Moodley at the end of last year. Her decomposed body was found in a car at a home in Chatsworth weeks after she went missing. Down in Cape Town, 5 people, including the owner of a vehicle testing station, are expected to appear in the Belleville Magistrates Court near Cape Town on charges of fraud and corruption. They're facing charges relating to an alleged countrywide vehicle licensing scam. The 61-year-old testing station owner is out on 10,000 Rand bail, while 3 of his co-accused got bail of 3,000 Rand. We're going to take a short commercial break, but when we come back, we're talking about Africa, specifically focusing on democracy on the continent. Don't miss it. Okay, we're not going to take a break because Africa Day celebrations are carrying on, and our very own reporter Liana Tsitsetsi is at Constitutional Hill, where former President Kgalema Motlanthe and Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa will be present to celebrate Africa Day. Very good morning to you, Liana. Thanks for joining us.
A very good morning to you, Eben, and welcome to Constitutional Hill, where there's a launch of what we call Oxfam South Africa. And with me is the Executive Director, Sipho Mtati, who will actually give us a brief of what actually is happening today and just a rundown of all the events that will be taking place. Of course, take into consideration that the event itself, the keynote speaker will be the former President Kgalema Motlanthe, who's going to address the event. But let's just get a few synopsis of what the event is all about. Ma'am, welcome. And can you just brief us as to the day's proceedings, actually thinking about the day that it's Africa Day celebrations, yes, and the launch of Oxfam South Africa?
Okay, thank you for having us and thank you for being here. So today we are launching Oxfam South Africa, which is an organization that has been here for a few years, but which we are today unveiling to the public to say we are here as the first African affiliate of Oxfam International. We are here as an indigenous African organization that exists to celebrate the agency of African people, to contribute to the achievement of the dreams and aspirations of African people, which is why Africa Day, exists to begin with. And so today, as you said, we have our partners here, who are the thousands of soldiers out there who work for social justice every day, and we are celebrating them. We also have here dignitaries such as Kgalema Motlanthe, former president, who will address the audience, the event, and we have several other speakers, including young leaders from across our continent who are going to speak about how they are reimagining our continent as a place of hope and of equality and justice.
And what would be society's expectation on Oxfam South Africa?
So actually, Oxfam South Africa is a carrying on of a 60-year legacy of Oxfam, where throughout the liberation struggle, Oxfam was there to provide solidarity with South African people who are fighting for their liberation. You will hear through the day the story of how it is actually that Oxfam had a very strong relationship with the ANC in Zambia, where a lot, which was the seat of the liberation movement, where we have worked, contributed in the country before 1994, and Oxfam has continued post 1994 to contribute to the rebuilding of the new South Africa.
Probably I missed that one out. Why the launch today and why on Africa Day?
Africa Day, for us as Africans who are leading this new Oxfam, carries big significance. And it's a day when, as African people, we remember how it is that in our different countries we were able to unite and fight together to achieve our freedoms. But it is also a day when we are sitting back to reflect on the long road ahead that as Africans we still have to, walk, because as you know, there are many challenges in our continent today. Across our continent we are seeing, famines, we are seeing conflict continue, and we are seeing extreme levels of poverty. And at a time when we hoped that things would be better. And so we're saying there are many problems, but we also, have to, I guess, accept that despite those problems and celebrate the fact that despite those problems, African people are standing up and they are rising and they are saying we want to continue building the dream that our liberation struggles were about. And that's what we're celebrating today.
Thank you very much, Madam. And that was the director of Oxfam South Africa, giving us just in detail what the event is all about. And back to you in the studio.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lehana Tsetsetse. Well, 10 o'clock, we'll go to the official celebrations. Let's take a break. When I come back, we'll talk democracy on the continent.
Africa is getting more and more digitized, and people have to navigate through an increasingly connected world.
I did a call my bay over here.
At school, I use my Wi-Fi.
On Network, we tell you about Africa's technology and social media landscape.
Politicians already do use Twitter a lot.
It's both Android and iOS compatible.
A solar-charged box that includes everything, the computer, the projector.
That's Network with Ms. Phumelele Zondi every Sunday at 9 p.m.
It's Africa Day. Now we're going to take a look at the state of democracy on the continent. Now, according to the Democracy Index compiled and released by Economist Intelligence Unit in 2015, it shows that democracy is a relative term, and despite some progress, Africa still has a long way to go. The state of democracy was measured in 167 countries, and only 24 were listed as full democracies, with only one African country falling in this category. It's the island state of Mauritius. In the category flawed democracy, 9 of the 51 listed countries were on the continent. 54 sovereign African states were classified under the dubious categories of hybrid regime or even authoritarian regime. That reminds us of Winston Churchill's famous quote, says, "Democracy is the worst form of government, except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time." I'm with political analyst Professor David Moore. He's in studio to talk about democracy here on the African continent. Very good morning to you, Prof. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for asking me.
How are we doing with regards to democracy?
Well, as the excerpt that you read indicates, it's a complex, complicated, and contested framework. I think the Economist Intelligence Unit would look at the institutions, separation of powers, executive, judiciary, legislative, that sort of thing. But if we kind of widen the scope and look at protests, are protests a form of democracy? So this country, South Africa, highest number of protests in the world, next to perhaps China. Are those indications that democracy is taking root, people are contesting authority? If we look at the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, we've had demonstrations against Kabila's attempts to extend his term. People get killed. I mean, it's a process that doesn't happen overnight. In Africa, you've got so many combinations of traditional modes of authority, you know, what sort of democratic institutions were there with your elders, your traditional authorities, mixed with legacies from the Cold War, socialism, Stalinism, Marxist-Leninism, social democracy, all embedded in a form which has been here, let's say, since the end of the Cold War of liberal democracy, which probably doesn't fit exactly the way the political scientists in North America might like it.
Democracy and capitalism, has it worked, the hybrid, for the continent?
Well, you know, the godfather of neoliberalism, Friedrich Hayek, said that Parliament was a way for the poor to steal from the rich, right? So you have a social democratic party. It raises taxes. So the rich say, well, this isn't democracy because it's not giving us freedom anymore, right? So it's been a mix. We've had capitalism emerge with authoritarian forms. Think of Chile, the coup in 1973, puts a dictator to bring back capitalism from the social democrats. But in other ways, if you look at the history of, let's say, Europe, for example, the rise of social democracy, with a strong working class in an emerging form of capitalism, which is very productive, but the working class is pushing to create unions, to create parties, and then you get a democratic form of capitalism, which spreads the goods, because unions have power to raise wages, to bring in health care programs and social democracy. So I think, in a sense, what you have to do is blend these democratic pushes from below with what's happening in the economy or in the realm of production. So if you have huge numbers of unemployed people, like in much of Africa, thousands and millions of people coming into the cities without jobs in the informal sector, it leaves lots of room for extra state activity, you know, mafia, informal crime. And if you're not getting the productive capacity developed in industrialization, for example, how does the bourgeoisie or the ruling class get rich? State capture, right? So you get kind of a blend of authoritarianism without that force from below, except perhaps inchoate popular protests, perhaps populist authoritarian parties emerging. Where do you put the economic freedom fighters in this blend? Where do you put the opposition people in the DRC, for example, where for 3 months the leader of the opposition who died, Tshisekedi, they haven't been able to bury him because so there's incredible contestation. This is probably the most fundamental transition that history has ever given us, and Africa's in the middle of it.
Talk about Africa being in the middle of it. We're constantly being told about the prosperous outlook that we have on the African continent, and then we're told that this will be the African century. Is that a mirage?
It's hard to say. You know, you read these reports by McKinsey and so on, and they say, the youth bulge, smart, young. There's a lot of youth coming in this continent compared to China, where everybody's getting old. I think in the long term, I think things look pretty good. But the long term, as John Maynard Keynes said, in the long term, everybody's dead. So what do you do in this meantime? You know, so we had the Africa Rising discourse, which came up with the commodity boom, so that those huge growth rates were dependent on oil. When the price of oil goes down, you have what's going on in Angola now. In Angola, though, you have Dos Santos, quite sick. He's leaving. You have opposition. You have youth, and again, we're talking generations here. You know, inventing new forms of opposition in music, in quickly emerging protests, that sort of thing. So I think we're seeing new forms of democracy, new forms of wealth. What I think the whole world has to deal with is what our Deputy Vice Chancellor calls, what many people call the fourth industrial revolution. And this is jobless growth. So, you know, the world as a whole, in Africa especially, where there's a huge growth in youth, what do you do for employment? So I think you kind of have to start with infrastructure, what kind of infrastructure blends with this new mode of production. Education, it's a new world, and many of the ideologies of the old world, from patriarchy, which the newscasts these days are pretty bad. So you get a lot of the old discourses blending in with new forms of production and new forms of democracy coming with the youth. And of course, the youth aren't angels.
Absolutely, we see that. we see that around us. In the end, I suppose we will have to manage it a little bit better. Prof, thank you for joining us this morning. Professor David Moore, he's from the University of Johannesburg, joined us this morning talking about democracy on the African continent. But let's go over to Alvis for more.
Thanks again.
Well, thank you, Eben. Now, to mark Africa Week 2017 and to celebrate Africa Day, the Human Sciences Research Council, the HSRC, is in collaboration with a range of partners, has organized a series of events that's aimed at placing Africa firmly on the path to achieve Sustainable Development Goals. Now, the three-day 7th African Unity for Renaissance International Conference at Freedom Park kicked off on Monday and came to an end yesterday. The conference brought together more African researchers and scholars to deliberate on emerging theories and practice in the fields of sustainable development, science and technology, the green economy, renewable energy, and economics. It's also the environment and system science that all form part of this. The conference culminated into the celebration of Africa Day, which is today. Research professor at the Institute for Economic Research on Innovation at the Tshwane University of Technology, Professor Mama Munchi, now joins us from our Pretoria studios. Professor, once again, a very good morning to you and welcome, Jumbo Africa.
Thank you for inviting us. Thank you.
First and foremostly, Prof,
nice to come back again.
What was the significance of the 7th Africa Unity for Renaissance International Conference that just ended?
Yes, the significance of the conference was that we had young academics that are as many as 132, and they all presented papers that have been reviewed properly. And there was a rich, I must tell you, a very rich intellectual knowledge exchange and networking. And they learned also, what I really liked this time, was they learned a lot about South Africa's relationship with the rest of Africa practically. We had excellent panels. Scientists, why, for example, what ECOWAS, ESCOM and others, how they are actually linking with the rest of Africa, and the challenges for this linking. In other words, the obstacles and the opportunities were very well done. And I really like this very much, because the link between each other is always told in a broad manner.
So, Professor, with all these intellectuals gathering at the conference, now some would say, can you hear me, Professor? Well, it seems like the professor can't hear me. Professor, can you hear me now?
Sorry.
It seems like we have a cut-off there, Professor. With all these intellectuals gathering at the conference, some would suggest that it's just another talk shop. What is the relation with the conference as well as Agenda 2063? Well, it seems like we've lost the professor there. We are going to see if we can get him back online, but before we get there, Eben, we're also asking you that question, of course, on the Facebook page as well as on the Twitter handle. Would like to find out from you on the question on the poll that we're posting to you today, whether or not Africa Day should be a public holiday here in South Africa. The rest of the continent is celebrating it as a public holiday. We're not, and we're also asking you on the question of the day: will this be the African century? Because that's some of the questions that we're going to pose to the good professor. You also heard Eben there speaking a little bit earlier to our other guests. But these are the questions, Eben, and people have been tweeting us.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I spoke to Professor Moore exactly about the issue, the question of the day that we put up, and that is, will this be the African century, and what needs to happen in order for that to for that to be the case? Very interesting views. Depanto tweets us and says, yes, Africa's time is now. There can never be life without Africa, and all other countries in the continent knows that. or without Africa is not a country anyhow.
Tambo says that we must fight for African independence from the West and deal with the ills of corruption and genocide. Also have the court of Africa. So says Tambo.
Continental says, no, not at all. We are still swimming in blood wars all over the place, poverty, diseases, etc. We cannot have any speeding change now, he says. Yeah, that's where we are, guys. Of course, we've got an official program kicking off shortly, Alvis. We'll be crossing there live at 10 o'clock.
Yep, shortly we're going to go there and find out what is happening. Of course, there's a panel discussion that's happening. We're also going to find out what's happening a little bit later in Mutu, the press conference at 10 o'clock. So lots of stuff that you can watch out for. Stay with us.
Yeah, back with you in a short little bit. Don't go away.
The Law Society has slammed notices sent to 4 universities to jack up standards or risk losing their LLB courses. The Council on Higher Education issued a stern warning to the universities to conform within 6 months.
I think it will affect the university. I think outside the law faculty, there's a funding issue.
It's been 112 years since Enoch Sontonga died as a relatively unknown composer, choir master and teacher. But today his legacy lives on through his greatest composition, Nkosi Sikeleli Afrika.
For all your news updates, stay tuned to Your World from Monday to Sunday.
Through he goes, he's still going, he pops it up, he says to Peterson. Easy as that. What a response it is from the Cheetahs. Brilliant score.
Imran Tahir produced a superb performance with the ball. The Proteas leg spinner put his side in the driving seat, scalping 3 wickets for just 18 runs.
Gifton Gope is flying toward third, and he is there with a triple, his first in the big leagues.
It is a Ferrari front row lockout, unless Hamilton can get on pole, and he can't. Ferrari, for the first time since France in 2008, have locked out the front row.
For all your sports news, keep it locked to Sports Live every Saturday and Sunday from 20:30.
I'm Alicia Jali, joining us live from our Johannesburg studios. A quick look now at your current news leaders. Parliament's Communications Committee has decided on 5 names to sit on the SABC's interim board. And the Constitutional Court has directed Social Development Minister Bathabile Dlamini and her department to account for their handling of the social grants contract.
And in tennis, Serena Williams has withdrawn from the BNP Paribas Open in Indian Wells and the Miami Open due to a left knee injury.
We're expecting it to move just in the towards the southern parts of the country, not so much coming towards southern Africa, not even touching the Mozambique channel. It's just going to move back towards the Indian Ocean.
Stay tuned to News Today, Monday to Friday from 3 to 5:30 p.m.
Rights and recourse tackles constitutional issues.
When South Africa became a constitutional democracy, we had a fairly sound legal system in place requiring the Constitution to guide the direction in which it must go and the way in which it must be refashioned.
The Justice Ministry, the custodian of human rights.
We actually have a plan to come up with a comprehensive review of our human rights instruments.
Advocates dealing with evidence.
Sometimes you have to use a crook to catch a crook. So we expected that the credibility would really be taken to task. You try and consult your witnesses and prepare them as best as you can.
Hashtag Rights with Dubila Matez on legal issues every Sunday at 2 o'clock Central African Time.
Hindu devotees took a holy dip at Sangam, the confluence of rivers Ganges. People and priests made their way to the banks before the break of dawn. Security arrangements were in place for police forces patrolling on the river banks to ensure smooth functioning of the event.
A mobile museum in India's West Mumbai is highlighting the skills and creativity of residents of one of Asia's largest slums.
That's what we've been doing here, is creating this platform, and we came here to help it develop and to, just build it up.
We are SABC News, that's for sure. Kendall is here, I'm here, and so is Elvis. We're hanging around, Elvis, because it's Africa Day today.
Africa Day today, and of course that discussion is the whole day today, because we want to find out from you about a very important question, because here in South Africa we're not celebrating Africa Day.
Not as a public holiday. Most other African countries do. Of course, 25 May 1963, that's when the OAU was founded. It's now the African Union, and a lot has changed since then.
Yeah, that was not December 2063, that was May 2063. You remember that song, but that's why we're asking the question. There's it on your poll for today.
Should Africa Day be declared as an official public holiday in South Africa? The Minister of Arts and Culture doesn't think so.
Yeah, well, he says we got to be educated about being African.
Yeah, 2/3 of people that don't agree with him, they say it should be a public holiday. Is it just because we love a holiday in South Africa?
That's another thing. 34% of you are saying no. Let's take a look at what you're tweeting us.
Soldat Ndamase says, there's nothing to celebrate. Africans are still poor in their own continent. Foreigners own African resources. Yes, that's harsh. 400 billion euro go out of French-speaking Africa to France every year. Fair.
Now, this one from Truth Be Said said South Africa is in Africa. It's high time that the government educate the masses on African heritage. Now, that's so true. That's what the minister said earlier.
It's not just the government. It's us as parents. It's us as parents in your own home is where you have to understand that what it is to be African.
Yes.
Barry tweets us. He says there are already too much public holidays in the SA. Why add more public holidays? Too many holidays. Holidays are for lazy people, Barry Martin says.
Mixie, DJ Mixie says, yes, it should be declared as an official public holiday in South Africa. Hashtag Africa Together, Africa Day 2017. There you have it.
Of course it should be a public holiday. Simple, keep tweeting us. Yes, the theme for Africa Day, of course, OR Tambo. Building a better Africa and a better world. And will this be the African century, Elvis? What's your sense?
That was the big question, and of course you heard the Professor Moore earlier said, and that was the question I was going to pose to Professor Bunshi. Unfortunately, we got cut off. We have some technical issues there. But that is the question we want to pose as well. Is this the year or the century of Africa? Right? Let's take a look at what you are saying.
Inspired African tweets us. Danny Golkin says, unity in Africa can unlock new African economies for the world. It should be a continental holiday. It is a continental holiday, except in South Africa. That's why we asked the question.
Vusi says, all African leaders must unite and Africans must stop killing one another. Then we can celebrate unity.
Renati says, I don't think so. Until we stand together and do things in our own ways. Yes, African ways are not inferior to the rest of the world.
Boy, Marvin to the world says, dictators governed, poverty stricken, civil war engulfed, disease infested, yet we still celebrate you, my Africa.
Wunderbar, that's wonderful. Anyhow, we're counting down to the official celebration that gets underway shortly. Well, they're a couple of minutes late. We'll be crossing to Cape Town shortly, but let's carry on and take a look at the top stories right now.
Africans are urged to be united as the continent celebrates Africa Today, 25th of May. The Independent Electoral Commission in KwaZulu-Natal is expected to announce the winners of the by-elections in Mutu in the north of the province any moment from now. And the Northwest Police have arrested over 30 protesters in connection with the hostage drama involving the mayor of the Ditsobotla municipality, Daniel Buthelezi. Talking about storming the Bastille there. Well, they stormed the building and set it alight in that municipality. Those are all your headlines, but before we get there, let's find out from Kendall Makhamate what's happening on the sports front, Kendall.
Gentlemen, I know you're all extremely ecstatic about Manchester United, but you know what else was set alight yesterday? The Proteas' tails. They were set alight out in England. Good morning to you. This is what we've got for you in the sports today.
Oh, he's definitely going now, A.B. de Villiers. But has he gone? Gone. He has gone. Big wicket, huge wicket.
The Proteas' preparation for the ICC Champions Trophy gets off to a shaky start in Leeds as England dominates them with bat and ball in their first ODI yesterday.
Now it's 0% chance of South Africa winning.
Sundowns come away with it. Vilakazi, can he finish it off? Still Vilakazi! Sundowns have got a third!
Mamelodi Sundowns come back from the Lions' den in the Congo with 3 points after beating AS Vita 3-1 in their CAF Champions League group stage match.
Pogba just behind it. It's Smalling's header. It's the second goal for Manchester United. And it's put in by Henrik Mkhitaryan.
And Manchester United's Paul Pogba and Henrik Mkhitaryan help their team outclass Ajax Amsterdam to win an emotional Europa League final 2-0.
Manchester United are UEFA Europa League winners 2017.
And we had the Blitzbokker in the building a little earlier. We'll be bringing you some of what Coach Neil Powell and Captain Philip Snyman had to say earlier on this morning. And I'll be making sure that we do a little bit of a chat as well, even if we can, about Manchester United.
Yeah, it'd be great. We'll do that a little bit later. But of course, right now, our order of business, my colleague Peter Ndoro, he's in Cape Town, of course. He's facilitating a special discussion on Africa Day. Peter, it's over to you.
Eben, thank you very much indeed, and a very warm welcome to all of you on this special Africa Day broadcast and Africa Day dialogue coming to you live from Cape Town here in South Africa, particularly for those of you that are watching from across the continent. A very warm welcome to you. Here in the audience, we say welcome to members of the Diplomatic Corps. We say welcome to members of the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on International Relations, the Select Committee, and senior DIRCO officials, and also distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and especially you at home, African citizens across the continent. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us and being part of this special conversation that we need to be having on a day such as this. So, back on this day in 1963, the Organization of African Unity, the AU as it became later reconstituted, came into being. And since then, to celebrate that anniversary, we've been celebrating Africa Day, also known sometimes as Africa Liberation Day. In addition to that, here in South Africa, May has been designated Africa Month under the theme, The Year of O.R. Tambo, Building a Better Africa and a Better World. And this gives us an opportunity to promote African unity, to deepen regional integration and recommit Africa to a common destiny. So that's what Africa Month is all about. O.R. Tambo himself would have turned 100 this year. So it's a very important year for South Africans, but I dare say the continent as well. And this is why this year has been given in recognition of this man. You'll hear a little bit more about O.R. Tambo and his contribution to promoting the values of Pan-Africanism, but I'm sure that if he was alive today, he would be the first to say that the liberation of South Africa happened largely in part of the contributions made by brothers and sisters across the continent. So he was a true internationalist in every sense of the word. So talking about centenaries, the African Union, OAU, will be turning 100 years in 2063. So in recognizing that milestone, the organization has put together an agenda called the Agenda 2063, which all of us really need to be familiar with, internalize, and find ways that we can contribute to make it happen. Agenda 2063 really is about the Africa that we want and what do we need to do to create that Africa. The pillars of it are 7 aspirations, and you'll find all 7, as I said. Please go online, make this kind of your, internalize it, make sure that every single person on the continent understands what Agenda 2063 is about, and the roles that you can play. There's 7 aspirations there, and because of time, we're only going to be able to really sort of look at 4 of those that will help us, I suppose, unlock this agenda for 2063 today on Africa Day. And to help us in that conversation, I have a panel of guests led by our host, the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Minister Maite Mashabane. I'll introduce the other panelists shortly, but you too can be part of this conversation. And our Twitter handle is #AfricaDayDialogue. #AfricaDayDialogue. We'll pick up your questions from there, put them through to the panel, and it may even be thoughts that you want to share on this particular day. But let's say hello to our first panelists, and let me begin by welcoming you, the Honourable Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Minister Maite Mashabane. Thank you very much for joining us, and welcome to you. Happy Africa Day.
Well, Peter, and to His Excellency and all Excellencies, High Commissioners and Ambassadors in the room, our Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee, Mr. Masango, to all Africans across the continent, Hoye Africa, hoye.
Yeah. And next to you, as you've mentioned, Mr. Siphosezwe Masango, Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee, International Relations. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Peter.
And next to you, the High Commissioner for Zimbabwe in South Africa, His Excellency Mr. Isaac Moyo. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to you, Tatenda Mauya.
Thank you.
All right, Minister, let me start with you. You're our host for this dialogue. It's an important day in Africa's history. Why the need for a conversation like this?
The need for a conversation like this is to continue marching on the footsteps of the men we are celebrating this year, Oliver Reginald Tambo, the foremost diplomat that Africa, amongst others, had produced. He wasn't working alone. He had a formidable wife, Mama Adelaide Tambo. So in DICO, we pride ourselves as being the diplomats of O.R. Tambo. We want to do things like him. Young gentlemen need to dress up like him. They need to represent South Africa, Africa, like him. Young ladies, go look at the photographs of Mama Tambo. Be presentable, like my sister Chichi here. Even if Ushibile Gamro, wake up, show the best that you are, because Africans are very special, very hardworking, always forward-looking leaders. Spirit of Pan-Africanism means thinking globally and acting globally to decolonize, integrate our people. That's what we're about.
All right, so you talk about this Pan-Africanism, and you know, as we look at aspiration number 5 in those 7 aspirations that I was talking about, it says, and we're trying to create an Africa with a strong cultural identity, common heritage, values, and ethics. And the hallmark and the kind of pillar around that is this Pan-Africanism, Minister, being fully entrenched by 2063. How do we get there?
We would get there if our young people, for us to attain and fully harness the youthfulness of our population, who has majority as women. sacrificing their withal for the sake of Africa. That's how 25 leaders met in 1963. I don't know where you were.
I was a figment of my mother's imagination at that stage.
And they pledged that they were going to, they had a roadmap, and they almost achieved that which they committed to. So it's in our call that when we hand over a baton, we hand it over to some responsible people who know that that which the Africa we want will not come from overseas. It's going to come from us and from within. Cultural identity, many other people get beaten up in some places, mistaken for this or that, because we are basically one people. We don't even have geographic barriers, except the maps that were drawn by people who didn't even know us. Some relatives were still in Zimbabwe by sunset. By the time they tried to come back home, it was dark. Now they were Zimbabwean and could no longer come back to South Africa and so on. So we are one people. So cultural identity should never be a problem. What we should focus on is skilling our youthful population. Education, I mean quality education. Access to education, we've started. Quality skills that respond to the economic needs of today, be it beneficiation. The best resource we have is our people. Second is our land. Third is the $2.5 trillion worth of exploitable mineral resources and beneficiation thereof. These things must find us ready to want to do them ourselves, so that when friends who have always been with us, we are the product of our people's struggles and the support, international solidarity and support. They find us in the doing. So if we all get into that mode, continue to think globally and act locally. There are no cultural barriers. Ask women. We know how to unite our children and our people.
Okay. You've mentioned quite a number of things we're going to explore in some of the other aspirations as well, particularly when we look at sustainable development and economic growth across the continent. Mr. Masango, one of the things that you do is, I suppose, in many ways, act on behalf of society, keeping a track on some of the things that are being done and progress that's being made. Do you feel that we are making sufficient progress towards this strong cultural identity, which is African and common heritage?
Yeah, thank you very much, Peter, and good morning to everybody. My sense is that we are getting there. As you would remember, the leadership of the African continent not only established the Organization of African Unity for purposes of freedom and the decolonization of the entire African continent. Amongst others was to fight for people to reclaim their identity in each of the nation states of the African continent, to be able to speak their own languages, to practice their culture, their religion, to reclaim, so to speak, their Africanness. The Africanness in the continental sense and the Africanness in the nation-state sense. And we would remember that in many of the countries, there are councillors, there are provinces led by premiers in South Africa, and the ministers at national level, where you have dedicated ministers or MECs or councillors for purposes of arts and culture, promotion of arts and culture. I had a privilege of being an MEC for arts and culture in Mpumalanga. Among the few African states that I've visited, there was only one in 2003, and for the purpose of this dialogue, I will not mention the country, where I was disappointed that up to grade 7, children were not studying in their own language. In fact, the own language was not there. Everything else was being done in a foreign language. And I think that's not going, you're not going to develop your own culture, your own values, etc., in a foreign language. But secondly, the heritage landscape of the continent still bear a lot of very visible colonial marks. And some have decided to destroy, some have said, keep this for history, but build your own. So change the heritage landscape to reflect the people themselves and the journey that they are walking. So I'm quite satisfied from the point of view of Parliament that various governments are doing something. And I have had a privilege of reading the book Making Africa Work by Obasanjo and others, and the Kigali report by President of Rwanda that was tabled to the African heads of state and government. If you look at the things that they have raised there, they emphasize what is being raised in the Vision African Agenda 2063. So quite clearly in my view, everybody else knows where we must get to. What will be important for our governments, however, is to bring in civil society, organized structures such as business, organized student organizations, organized women's organizations, so that society is better able and is better able to support that which leadership is articulating in their name. And so that parliaments also bring in money to support these initiatives. For instance, one of the things that the AU Commission then, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, was to request that each of the parliaments should adopt African Agenda 2063 in their parliaments, which we did, so that when the Minister of Arts and Culture or government requests for money to do the things that must happen there, Parliament must say, by the way, this is also our view, this is our agenda too.
All right, and you've raised some very interesting points, and language being one of them that I'm going to explore again a little bit further with you. Because for us to be able to communicate, we need to find vehicles that are going to be able to do that. Yeah. But there is that sort of national identity as well that's quite important. And how do we balance the two? But I'll get back to you on that. Your Excellency, we're talking about cultural identities and common heritages. I suspect, and luckily for people like me and others who've been able to travel across the continent, it's quite quick to see those common linkages, actually, if you travel. And I'm just wondering your thoughts about how do we make sure that we see those things that actually link us, that we already have in common, that perhaps we haven't noticed?
Well, thank you very much. Of course, I'm happy to be contributing to this conversation today. This Africa Day, and happy Africa Day to Africa. I also want to recall what you said from the beginning, that this is the year of O.R. Tambo, and just share that as a young diplomat in the 1980s in Addis Ababa, I used to interact during OAU summits with O.R. Tambo, always ably assisted by Johnny Makatini. And I remember him providing leadership in the OAU's discussions on the South African question all the time. It would start with the frontline states and then move to the continent. Yes, indeed, he was a fine diplomat, and I saw it by myself. Now, to come back to the issues you raise, let me say that I'm very optimistic that the continent is on the right track to achieving the aspirations we are discussing here, and the other 6 aspirations as well. I think the first point one would want to note is education. The continent has defined these aspirations very clearly, and by so doing, the entire African continent, our youth, our women, are beginning to know what it is the continent aspires to. I think that is really the first step, and it's important. We need now to tap into our respective capabilities as people. We have women who are able to do certain things within the context of Agenda 2063, and what culture means in the African context. I think they have a very clear role. It is about our language. It is about our identity. We want to reaffirm our identities as Africans. It is about the growth, economic growth and prosperity, its inclusiveness that we want to promote. It is about Ubuntu, I am because you are, and this is why we talk about inclusive growth, so that that growth is not just for certain individuals, certain sections, to the exclusion, especially of the majority of our people. We will get there because there is already a lot of connectivity among various African countries. If you imagine where we were in 1963, if you were here in South Africa, what did you know about Nigeria then? Maybe almost nothing, because we had been thrown into these segments, and each was a fort separate from the other. But the current situation is very different. We are able to connect. We follow Nollywood every day and see what is happening in Nigeria. And I'm sure there are many people here who enjoy Nigerian films. And you can say that about many other countries. Our leaders have a platform where they are interacting with one the other, sharing insights, sharing these aspirations, and our schools are assisting in spreading the message, the education to our youth, and of course our women know that yes, they are accommodated by African culture's desire to uplift everybody, to promote social cohesion, to promote peace and security. In fact, all the aspirations in one and several other ways have a common link with the cultural values that we are promoting in this segment. It is African culture that converts itself into a tool that promotes the other aspirations of Agenda 2063. And already we have certain languages within the African continent. You speak Swahili in East Africa, you can go to Central Africa in the DRC and speak Swahili. There are certain languages that are cross-border. You speak them across countries. And we just need to do a little bit more to promote those and also promote those languages for education purposes.
I will come back to the language thing because it's quite an important thing, especially when we look at 54/55 countries on the continent. Minister, I'm getting a sense that education is going to be quite key for our citizens across the continent, because if you ask someone in South Africa, even in Zimbabwe, are you African? The first thing they think of is, I'm black, not white, as opposed to, I am a citizen of the continent. How do we change that kind of thinking, that the first thing when you say I'm African, you identify with the continent, as opposed to any other kind of classification that we've learned to have over time? How do we get us to think of ourselves as Africans, meaning we're from the continent?
Luckily, Peter, South Africa is led, and I'm saying this without fear of contradicting myself any other way, by a movement, a political movement that is 105 years old, the African National Congress, that all African leaders from Mauritania to Zimbabwe to everywhere, that they claim as their own. Mm-hmm. I'm told that the first African passport that OR traveled on to the UN was from Mauritania in 1962. We spent 2 days with our diplomats last week, the ones serving in our continent, South African ambassadors and high commissioners, and visited OR's old home. In Zambia, you can't gossip in any of the South African languages.
Yes, I know them all.
Because like they are in Zimbabwe, they'll hear you. They either speak Ngozi or Lozi. So language should never be a barrier to unite people. Because language was never a barrier for Europeans and their Europeanness. They still speak different languages, but they are united in that which they believe is their cultural identity. Some countries are just a cluster of islands. We are just one big landmass. We are one people. We speak similar languages. There is not a single African that you can start an African song here and they do a misstep, including Honorable Minister Lukota. You'll see how they quickly join in and dance in one rhythm together. So we are one people. We are united in our diversity. And we should never see the so-called division by language as an obstacle. South Africans are best defined by the Constitution of South Africa. We are majority Black and African, and more than majority, almost 90%. That's why we want radical economic transformation after 23 years. It's not a nice to have, it's a need to have. Because others can be spectators of others owning things in their own land. Because you will not find that in Japan, you will not find that in any other country, where the owners of the land are just spectators or they are given a share. You know, in my mother tongue, an ear of a cow. It doesn't have, I don't know if it has protein, some cartilage, and so on. Yeah. But sharing in the actual slaughter is better than being given a piece of an earlobe as a share. So language, it's not a barrier, but we can do more. There are certain languages that you can use on our continent and you can get very far. The other best language our people know and love, which I refer to, is music. Everywhere you go, whether Brenda Fassie is alive or no more, her spirit lives on. Everybody knows Vulindlela. Yes. And they all jive to it. Our brothers and sisters continue with intermarriages all over the continent, despite that which you call a barrier. Yeah. It's not a barrier in the real sense.
Love is
love is, that's what we're known for. Yeah. So we are united in our diversity, and it's not the first time. Europeans didn't have to wait until they speak one language before they became united.
They just got over it.
African Union, or Organization of African Union Leaders in 1963, on the 25th of May, as our president will be saying to the nation in the next coming few minutes, did not wait until they spoke one language Before they spoke of decolonization and integration of our people. So we need not wait. We don't have the time. We don't have the luxury. We don't have the barriers except those that are in our minds. This program that precedes our budget speech, I love for one thing. It brings people together in a real sense, from ECOSOC to all other stakeholders in the room, to say, this is your program. People to people is. We have, and I see my beautiful girl children take the girl child to school. They are dressed properly in uniform, and they're here. This is the future we want belongs to them, not because of biology, because they believe in something. They believe in the unity of our people, because biology alone can't take you far.
Yeah, sure.
But unity for a purpose, and unity in action, and unity in the implementation of our 7 aspirations of the Africa we want, is that which brings us together under conditions that are peaceful, secure, and fully developmental.
All right, okay. And I think you've answered a lot of the questions, particularly around language. I'm mindful of time, so I'm going to shift gear a little bit, and perhaps if there's any questions from the floor, if there's anybody that'd like to make a point. And we're looking at aspiration number 5, an Africa with strong cultural identity, common heritage, values, and ethics. If there's any comment you'd like to make, there's a gentleman over there. There's some microphones roving around. If we can get a microphone to you. Okay. If you could just identify yourself and then ask your question.
I'm one of the 4 students that have won the DEDCO article writing competition.
Congratulations.
To the Honorable Minister, are we ever going to get to a stage where African countries are connected with integrated infrastructure that crisscross the continent?
Okay, so we talk about from Cape to Cairo. Mm-hmm. Is that going to be a reality, or are we getting there? How far are we on this? There's a lot of infrastructure, but how integrated is it?
Well, congratulations once again for winning the award, and we welcome our Deputy Minister, Honorable Mfeketo. She was held up. It's Thursday today, so there are other things we do on Thursdays. The connection, the integration of our economies would never work until our infrastructure is interconnected. So this is one of the primary projects that NEPAD is spearheading, and they had also gone further to look for 8 heads of states who are going to be champions for this, and they appointed His Excellency President Zuma as the champion for road rail. You see, I have learned a bit about rail infrastructure, that the speed of the train, it's important as much as what technology have you put on, and you can always change or modify the speed of the train from one country to the next, so that goods and services and people can travel. It mustn't take 2 weeks, for example, in an EAC area for cattle, 2 weeks on a truck from Uganda to Kenya. But is it happening? Are we changing that? The answer, it's a big yes. If NEPAD was here, we would share with you the documentation, practical projects, some fully ready for funding, some already functioning, some you miss a connection of about 100 kilometers between one region to the next. While we are connecting through our trilateral or tripartite free trade zone, and we have launched the Continental Free Trade Area, we've also realized that it doesn't help to sign MOUs when there's no practical, functional infrastructure that connects and make it easy for our people to travel. You will see our people will not be fence jumpers. They will travel legally from one space to the next. And there will not be a problem to some other overseas country. They love Africa. This is a land of resources and all. Our infrastructure program is moving. And I can say this without fear of hesitation because, again, we have moved from just drawing maps, plans, project plans, bankability of projects, to actual implementation of projects, to also looking for funding to finalize and connect the missing dots and links in between.
I'm going to have to jump in because we've got commercial breaks that we've got to get to, and also we've got to welcome another guest as we say thank you very much indeed to Ambassador Moeta Tenda Rukuru Matubatsira Nemashoko Amatipana. I'm basically saying thank you very much indeed for the words that he's shared with us today. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, don't forget hashtag Africa Day Dialogue if you want to be part of this conversation. We'll continue with the next aspiration, which is aspiration number 1 after this.
Yeah, thanks a lot there to Peter and Dora. Peter is moderating down in Cape Town on this very interesting Africa Day discussion. Well, they're going to take a few minutes to get ready and get their guests in order and also turn around some of the guests. So, while we wait for them, let's carry on and have a look at what this day really means. Of course, Africans are always urged to be united as the continent celebrates this important day.
All 54 African nations celebrate Africa Day. This time, the continent will celebrate the 54th anniversary of the OAU. President Jacob Zuma is expected to address the commemoration events in Pretoria. The PAC says it said that despite attempts to unify Africa for half a century, it's still not a permanent member of the UN Security Council. It also lamented the fact that the AU is funded by foreign donors.
We want to see this day being a public holiday in South Africa. It's the day that the founding fathers of the African struggle, liberation struggle, such as Kwame Nkrumah and all the Pan-Africanists, had a very great ideas about it. They wanted to see a united Africa with one government working for the African people.
Even though the day is not a public holiday, many people commemorate it across the country.
We must be proud of where we are coming from.
I want to see everybody united as like a rainbow colors, and I want to see all the people from different cultures being together.
Africa is the only place in the world that I can be proud to be an African and not to be called a foreigner, called different names or what.
It's a celebration of us as a continent, is it not? I myself am not too big on it. My wife loves it. It is where obviously everyone dresses in their national heritage clothes.
The PAC says the AU needs to fast-track efforts to unite the continent and do away with colonial borders. Muntlengeni Dipoko, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Meanwhile, the Minister of Arts and Culture here in South Africa, Mr. Nat Mthethwa, says no African should feel like a foreigner anywhere on the African continent. Minister Mthethwa says South Africans should understand themselves a little bit better as Africans, as the questions of identity is a crucial one.
What is important is that we should do everything in our power, first and foremost, to raise national consciousness
Right,
amongst our
ladies
people.
and gentlemen, we're going to be
the
going
day
live
itself.
again in
You can
about a
have it
minute,
as a
so
holiday,
please,
but
if you
if
could
you
find
don't
your
understand
seats,
what
please
it's all
find your
about,
seats.
remember that
And also,
South
please feel
Africa
free to start
was a
eating.
prior state for a very long time. And because of that, even today, we are still working on the mindset of South Africans who would not sometimes feel as part of the great continent, Africa. So we commenced then in 2015 with this process of deepening this consciousness amongst our people. Today, it's better than it was 3 years ago because there is a conversation about the Africa Day. There is a conversation about Africa because unity is the bedrock upon which OAU was formed. We need, therefore, to spread this word to the people of South Africa that South Africa is part and parcel of the continent. So there is no need, for instance, to see any African anywhere else on the continent as a foreigner. And that, for us, would be more beneficial for us as South Africans, more than just declaring a day as a holiday.
Mm-hmm.
So we are on this path, we are on this journey to ensure that indeed the paradigm is shifting. People understand themselves more as Africans, because the question of identity is quite crucial.
Yeah, crucial, the question of identity. That is what it is. That interview was recorded a little bit earlier. Let's go back to Peter Ndoro now in Cape Town. Of course, he's facilitating a special discussion on Africa Day. Peter?
Eben, thank you very much indeed, and a very warm welcome back to Cape Town in South Africa. And this is the venue for today's very special broadcast on Africa Day, the Africa Day Dialogue. And if you've just joined us, we're in conversation that's led by the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation in South Africa, Minister Maitenkwana Mashabane. And we have two other panelists, and we're now joined actually by the Zambian Minister, Zambian Ambassador to South Africa, Commissioner, His Excellency, exactly, His Excellency Emmanuel Mwamba Maiseni. Mulibanchi Baba, welcome.
You're giving me too many titles. Happy Africa Day.
Thank you so much for joining us. And we've brought you on to this next aspiration, which is aspiration number 1. I'm going to start with you because we've heard these other voices. A prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. And this is a really important one because it affects most Africans, and particularly the most vulnerable. How do we make sure we don't leave anybody behind as this growth goes forward? Before it used to be the inequality between our colonial rulers and the blacks, but now more and more it's the inequality between blacks, and that grouping is growing much faster.
Yes, inclusive growth is very important, especially that Africa is projected as the next economic giant. We were at the World Economic Forum for Africa just 2 weeks ago in Durban. And the focus for the world is on Africa. And they are projecting in the next 50 years, Africa will be that economic giant. If you look at countries posting good economic growth in the last 10 years, they are African countries. So prosperity is coming to Africa. But how do we ensure that this prosperity is shared by Africans, by its people, and not leaving behind, especially women and young people? You are aware that Africa has a young population, and if we do not include them in the plans, in the programs that we are doing for Africa, we'll bring economic growth, but there will be high inequality in incomes. So it's very important that we move together as we embrace this growth that is coming.
Mr. Masango, I hate to say this, but I think we have to call a spade a spade. Some of the drama is self-induced. Some of the problems we create ourselves. How do we fix that? That, you know, we have a big man and he's living large, but is leaving people across the road, literally. How do we engender a culture that shares the resource?
Well, let me just start by referring to at least one or two countries. After the Second World War, and Japan was defeated, so it stopped its expansionist policy of getting territories, and it invested a lot of money on education, which led to a decline in population. 50 or so years, it became an advanced country in terms of technology. And one of the things that President Suharto did in Indonesia was more or less the same thing. So there are quite good lessons around East Asia that we can learn from. In the African continent, as you've indicated, one of the things we must do, and some governments, most of the governments are doing, is to invest in education. And Agenda 2063 says that we've got to ensure that there is expertise, we've got to ensure that there is inclusive growth, that there must be industrialization so that we don't export raw material to other countries or export jobs. There must be industrialization within the African continent and manufacturing. So these are some of the things that we must attend to. Former president of Nigeria in the Making Africa Work, again says, now we have about 230 million young people. And he predicts that by 2050, these will be about 245 million. They will either become a dividend for the African continent to the extent that we have invested in education, then they are able to assist in running the African continent. And or, if we don't invest in education, they don't have skills, they are unemployed, they are poor, the gap is widening, then they will unleash social instability. So all of us have got to hurry up fast if the thinking is that we're hurrying up slowly.
Okay, Minister, we talk about inclusive growth, sustainable development, and most of the time when we use that language, we're talking about it within our borders. But actually, for Africa to succeed, we actually need to be talking about it in terms of countries cooperating together. We can't have countries developing at different rates, some getting left behind. How do we make it a transnational agenda?
Well, education, like sports, is the real equalizer. I have seen it live in India. When I was a high commissioner or ambassador there, when people think globally and act locally, I saw Bangalore, for those who know India, and Hyderabad becoming ICT hubs, because people were running Silicon Valley. Almost 50% of them, Silicon Valley in the United States of America, and we're now billionaires, we're Indians. So they will voluntarily go on sabbatical, like go back home, to work for free, to create these hubs. They could have chosen to travel the world and entertain their children, but they thought of going back home. The last time I was in India, I heard Google has decided its headquarters would be Hyderabad. Because Indians who had made money somewhere thought of going to teach ICT for free. I knew that there's e-governance learning from Indians in the early 2000s. So our people, particularly our young people, need to please help us. By that I mean, don't go to school to become a nice employee of someone. go to school, gain skills to create, to be innovative, to create spaces for development for your peers. If we could change the structural metaphor, if you like, of our education, like we need to change that of the economy, is to educate job providers as much as we produce job seekers. If you ask young people, you are at university, what do you want to do as an adult? I want to work for so-and-so. The other one, I also want to be a CEO of so-and-so. Whether that company will still be around or not, they don't know. So can we create more job creators? And education and skill development is the biggest equalizer. It's like sports.
Okay.
Can I come back to that?
Yes, yeah, sure.
You would remember that there are 5 regions in the African continent: your ECOWAS, your East African Community, your SADC, etc. The 5. One of the things they are about is the development of the what do they call it? Tripartite free trade areas in each of the regions. Because as you have observed, you cannot grow alone. So SADC is doing that. But there's a move towards a continental free trade area in the same way that it is modeled like the European Union. So that the whole continent or regions of the African continent actually increase intra-African trade or inter-regional trade. And ultimately, you may have a very big common market, the one that was established in 2015, signed by 26 countries in Egypt. The free trade.
Your Excellency, one of the things that we do well on the continent is plan and create strategies. And we do that really well. That's why we set up SADC, ECOWAS, EAC, and now we're talking this even grander plan. I'm asking you as SADC, how have you been able to make it happen as SADC? Because if we can't even do it regionally, how on earth are we going to be able to translate it into a continent-wide initiative?
First of all, the answer is implement, because the plans have been there. If you look at the plans from 1963, and now the new plans, the AU Agenda for 2063, the plans have been there. But there's been a recognition that we are not trading with ourselves. In fact, we are trading only about 12% with Africa itself. 88% is with the rest of the world. So we export resources, we export jobs, we export skills. So the plans by the 5 regional blocks is to promote regional integration. But the hindrance has been a few things. For example, infrastructure. We need to resolve our waterways, our ports, our roads, our rail, and their links, our airports. It's sad that, for example, if you have to go to another African city, you either have to go to Europe to come back to where you're going. If I am from Lusaka, I want to go to Kinshasa, my next door neighbor, I have to come to South Africa to get to Kinshasa. So there are these regional issues that we have to resolve, especially around infrastructure, integration of our finance system. Our laws have to be governed, especially our trade laws, because they also act as a barrier. So there are those issues that, as Africa, we have to resolve. But it's implement. We do not want regional bodies to be talking shops or summits to be talking shops and pictures. No. I think our people demand that we resolve these issues. Our people demand action. They've heard a lot of us talk and talk.
So, Minister, what I'm hearing from His Excellency is that it's you, the politicians, then, that can make this happen.
Well, it is all of us in this room that have to make it happen. By all of us in the room, I mean from our youngest the beautiful girls seated there. It's from our friends, diplomats. It's from our people's organizations in the room and ECOWAS and everybody. It's from our businessmen and women. It's from our South African International Council of International Relations, SACOI, to say this is what we mean by the doing. Let me be practical. We are amongst the largest, when I say we, I mean the continent of Africa, platinum producers. Where do catalytic converters get made? In Japan. I was once a president of a conference of parties of the UN FCCC. There was something called reducing footprints, that which pollutes the environment. How about producing those catalytic converters here on the continent with Japanese technology? Because that way we will be skilling our youth. That way we will be cutting down on our negative footprints, that which climate change says we shouldn't be doing. But if you check on the ports today on the continent, all are pointing to somewhere outside, not helping us to integrate. Hence, the question earlier was, how do we integrate our economies? We don't want to be isolated. We've never been isolated. But we can do both. We can trade with the world, and the world can trade with us, and they will see they are wasting a lot of time by transporting our precious mineral resources somewhere. This includes polished marble, by the way. Cut marble, go and polish it overseas, bring it back to Africa.
So what's stopping us? This is what I keep coming back to. And I know you said that it's all our responsibilities, but I'm suggesting possibly President Mugabe, President Zuma must sign these things.
We have
and
signed
it must
these
happen.
things, Peter. We've signed these things. But we are running one of the aspirations or the founding articles of the African Union is that we also have a democracy, accountability, rule of law, all these things. Our leaders can't be dictators. So that's why we need all our partners to say, how do we reduce our carbon footprints? How do we genuinely work together? Because it takes signing, we could have signed 10 agreements by now. How do we get into the doing, the actual implementation? We can't go to a conference of parties of the UNFCCC, let's reduce carbon footprints, and then we come back quietly, cut stone at night, and then transport it by ship to some other faraway country, polish it, and bring it back as polished marble, and even ordinary Africans, where the stone comes from, can't afford that. It's going to take more than government to make people their own liberators. Peter, we have done a lot in the 54 years. No continent or a people have achieved as much as we have done, but we still have a lot of work to do. Because this 300 million that Honorable Masango referred to, it's new, if you like, new middle class who would be wanting to consume goods on the continent. But who is going to be producing these goods for them if they are not part of the actual production because they've been skilled to take advantage of that? You can't become a shareholder of a mining company and you have not even seen a gold bar. the finished product. You've never even visited underground to see what's happening to rock drillers there where the gold is mined. So it's going to take more than government. It's going to take all of us, like we're seated in this room from all our corners, because one thing we need to celebrate, it's Africa of 1963 has majority of governments elected democratically. This is what we're supposed to be clapping our hands to ourselves. Africans don't like doing this. I thought you were going to do that to yourselves. I can go on and on and on and list the things we have managed to achieve against all odds. But this partnership, it's what completes the social fabric of our people. We've never spoken about taking anybody of another color by boat or ship to somewhere else. We all call this home. This is our home. So we all have to have a responsibility to make it work. That's why socio-economic transformation, it's not a luxury for someone else. It is a responsibility for all of us.
Your Excellency, we've got the youngest population in the world now, this continent. So young people are watching this dialogue, this conversation, and they're saying, hang on, you're saying all of these things, but I'm the most unemployed. I'm the most disadvantaged. How do we create this sustainable development that's going to make sure that these young people can aspire to something, knowing that there's jobs and there's a future for them and that they're going to be part of this economic story?
Can I share with you an experience? When I was a young ambassador to the Philippines, I used to take taxi rides driven by doctors, medical doctors, who were still waiting to be employed as medical doctors. They don't sit at home with their certificates. They do something while waiting to get a job in which they're skilled at. I'm just sharing.
Yes, sure, sure.
This is something that doesn't happen in Zimbabwe or Zambia or South Africa But that was his question.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. I think there's a discussion, first of all, on Africa to decolonize its own education system. Because this is a system that teaches people to be employees and employees for life. The education system that lacks promotion of entrepreneurship. The education system that doesn't wait for you to get employed. You finish, instead of becoming a doctor, for example, you own a hospital. Instead of becoming a teacher, you own a school. So it's a mindset shift, and I'm glad that our leaders have been discussing at continental level. And also to appraise ourselves of what we've achieved. I think from 1963, there was a move for liberation, for freedom to come to Africa. 50 years later, every single country in Africa, other than Western Sahara, is independent. So that mark has been achieved. The next mark is economic independence, because we want to own our economies. We want our people to feel that they own this economy, and that's a march we are going to. And Agenda 2063, I think, has done very well to lay the foundation. Learn from the past 50 years, and then build on that past to make a better Africa in the next 50 years.
All right. Mr. Masango, one of your jobs is to make sure that the politicians are doing these things. What would you say are some of the challenges that are holding us back? Because we've only got 46 years left to get to 2063, and so it's urgent now, and things need to be accelerated. What can we do to accelerate these things and make them happen? Because, yes, we've made progress 54 years down the track. We've only got 46 to do a lot more work, I would suggest.
Yes. There are a few things that members of parliament and society generally must do with their governments in the whole African continent. One of which is to ensure that government attends to some of the weaknesses that have been raised, for instance, by the report by President Mbeki about the illicit financial flows.
Right.
There are trillions of rands that are leaving the shores of the African continent to other countries through other means, trafficking, etc., etc., etc. We've got to plug that gap. There's a lot of tax evasion by transnational companies that, through all manner of things are not paying tax in the African continent. We've got to stop that. We've got to attend to the misappropriation of funds or corruption. If money is spent for something else when it was meant for something else, parliaments in the whole continent must say, but this was meant for infrastructure. When is it going to be finished? When is that bridge, that road, that school, that clinic, etc., etc.? But you were also talking about young people. An ambassador here was saying the reorientation of young people is important, that they must not think they're going to grow to work for someone. They must establish companies, and not only sole proprietorship, but companies. Once they finish universities or at the colleges, they must try to do something for themselves. One of the things that I've noted is that university education, yes, is good, and University of Technology education is also good, but we're running short of very basic skills of boiler makers, of engineers, structural engineers, civil, etc. Many other basic skills in the continent. We have had to import people either from China or from elsewhere to come and do this. So that rethinking, that reimagining ourselves as participants in the economy of the country is very important. And young people have got to have discussions among themselves. In many countries, there are dedicated departments or institutions for the young people to get involved, to get discussions, to train, and there are funds that they can tap on.
Okay, all right. Let's draw on our audience here as well. If there's any questions that anybody has. Who else has won a literary award today? Okay. All right. Wherever your microphone goes, I'll follow you. Okay.
The hands of the young people was up.
Yeah.
We go to the young people.
Can take two.
Okay, I'll take them. Yeah, speak. They'll switch. There we go.
Thank you. And happy Africa Day to everybody and everybody watching us.
Oh, yeah.
Happy Africa Day.
The Deputy Chairperson of South African Council on International Relations, and we are members of society, civil society, business, labor, the youth, and we are an independent body advising Minister from a different perspective, not from the office bearers who are policymakers, but we are on the ground and we are sounding board to say, this is what we are sensing on the ground. Now with Agenda 2063, we have a highway of 4 lanes or 5 lanes. How do we engage, because governments will put together policies and foreign policies that hopefully advance the national agenda of their respective countries. But how do we bring in more private sector people in business to assist governments to achieve the goals in job creation and skilling up, in driving the economy? How do we make sure that more people in the private sector participate and engage in making sure that these are achieved? And perhaps in the next year's session, there needs to be somebody from private sector in the
sitting
panel
here.
to give that perspective as well.
Okay. All right. What I'll do, can we get a microphone to our young students there, because we're speaking on their behalf quite a bit at the moment, and we don't want to put words in your mouth. Is there somebody there, young lady, if you could stand up? Are you listening to all of this? people with white hair like me speaking about the future. And I'm just wondering, what's your concern? What do you want to know? What do you want these big people to do?
I want to say...
First of all, tell us your name and what's your school.
Okay. Yeah. My name is Mama Africa. I'm from Ikwekwezi Secondary School in Tambo. I would like to thank the Minister for inviting us.
Yeah.
And I want to know, you said you are going to invest a lot in education. We can invest, but the thing is, there are children who can't, they are not good at school. No, it's not that they can't, they are not good at learning.
Okay.
They have skills to do. So you have to motivate them to do their skills. We can't just invest in education and expect us to do that. Not everyone have the mind for reading, doing the schoolwork. We also need to have skill, motivation, someone to motivate us to do something else. We can't all be teachers. We can't all be working from everyone. We can do something else. Maybe I can be a singer one day.
All right. Fantastic. Okay, thank you very much indeed. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I'm going to get Minister to answer that question. But in the meantime, I want to say thank you very much indeed to Mr. Masango and Honourable Commissioner Mwaba. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so we'll be right back with the answer to those questions after this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter Ndoro. He's there with the Africa Day celebrations and that panel discussion. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, there's more for you. Stay tuned.
If you ask this pretentious mixologist what is needed to make the ultimate cocktail, she'd say a thorough knowledge of science. Ooh, right in the face. Yes. If you asked us, we'd say it's less about science and more about, well, chemistry.
Get 2 bottles of Cedric's The Original Old Brown for only 55 Rand from Tops at Spar.
Do you support the calls made by Blayton Nzimande and Solly Mapaila?
It is not a call by Comrade Solly Mapaila and the Comrade Blayton Nzimande. It is the position of the party.
Yes.
And the position of the party, we support it unambiguously.
Why?
The theory of the revolution, in simple terms, was that revolutionary forces are going to take charge of the state. And having taken charge of the state, they are going to transform the state to eventually transform society.
Join me, Mpotsedu, live every Monday to Thursday at 17:30.
On Network, we tell you about Africa's social media and technology landscape.
21st century economies rely on technology to truly thrive.
We have quite a comprehensive portfolio of interventions in the tech entrepreneurship space.
And Africans are using tech and social media to solve the continent's unique challenges.
App Nigeria is an online marketplace.
Radio Vibe is a social media platform for radio music.
That's Network with me, Spumelele Zondi, every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. Central African Time.
To be African is beautiful. To be African is a privilege.
It represents hard work. It represents being able to stand on your own.
And respecting other cultures as well.
It's about promoting African heritage.
We are all Africans. Let's come together so that we can have a formidable force.
Our cultures interlink with one another.
And by standing together and embracing one another, there's power in unity.
It is time to cut off this issue of xenophobia.
I stand for African unity. I stand for promoting unity in Africa because
there are many opportunities to be whatever you want to be.
Africa
is one of the most important continents.
Because if we can come together as one, we will be able to actually build a better Africa, the new Africa for the future.
And if we unite our hearts and our minds together and we go forward, we will conquer.
So let us all arise and be proudly African.
Being an African is who I am right now.
I'm proudly African. I love Africa.
Wishing you all a very happy Africa Month.
One love.
Jumbo, Africa. Welcome back. Now we're celebrating Africa Day today. Let's now cross to Griselda Lewis, who is at the EFF celebrations here in Johannesburg. A very good morning to you, Griselda. Tell us what is happening there. Paint us a picture. I see some red in the background there.
Good morning to you, Elvis. It's quite colourful here at Joburg Park in the Johannesburg CBD, where the EFF will be celebrating Africa Day 2017. I guess it's an opportunity not just for the EFF, but as South Africans, as part of the African continent, to look at how far Africa has come in terms of development and looking at some of the challenges that the continent still faces relating to underdevelopment, to unemployment, as well as poverty, and political strife on some parts of the continent as well. So I think one of the things that will take center stage, if we look at Africa Day celebrations in the South African context, what we're expecting the EFF to touch on, for example, is issues relating to xenophobia. You know that South Africa has been plagued by xenophobic violence that has rocked South Africa and cast, a very bad light. If you look at South Africa and the way that we treat our fellow brothers and sisters, if you just look at the statistics there, Elvis, for example, you'd know, of course, that more than 350 people have been killed in the wake of xenophobic violence in South Africa, leaving about more than 100,000 people displaced. And you recall, of course, every time the xenophobic violence does rear its ugly head, you often find foreign-owned shops that come under attack in South Africa. So I guess another day again to reflect on how fellow Africans are able to live together. And the issue of social cohesion is one of the things that also needs to come up, I guess, in many of these Africa Day celebrations that are being held around the country. So that's one of the issues. We're also expecting the EFF to also touch on, the violence perpetrated against women and children that has rocked South Africa in recent weeks. We're expecting them to say something on that as well, because I guess many could also argue that an attack on women, whether it's in South Africa or in any part of the country or the continent as well, or an attack on children, which would be the most vulnerable, would be an attack on the state itself. So I guess tying all of those together and looking at the way that we treat each other as Africans, how we're able to live together in peace and in harmony, is certainly a conversation which we're expecting to come from the EFF leadership here today. What I can certainly tell you is that there are South African flags that these EFF members and supporters are also carrying here today. So it'll be very interesting to see, what some of the conversations will be about, including some of the aspects that I spoke about. But the EFF leadership has not yet arrived here at Joburg Park, but we're expecting them to touch on that and many other issues when it comes to the development of Africa, how far we've come, how exactly Africans are able to benefit from the richness that is the African continent. And if we talk about resources, for example, on the African continent, how each and every one of, whether it's a South African, a Tanzanian, or a Zimbabwean, is able to benefit from the richness of their countries. So it's certainly a conversation which we're going to enjoy very much here this morning as we're celebrating Africa Day 2017.
Griselda, thank you so much for that report that is at the EFF celebrations of this day, this very important day, Africa Day today. Now, my colleague Peter Ndoro is still in Cape Town, where he's facilitating a discussion on Africa Day. It's over to you now, Peter.
back. We're still having this conversation, this special broadcast on Africa Day, the Africa Day Dialogue, and we're talking about the 7 aspirations it contained in Agenda 2063, because in 2063, the Organization of African Unity, which was reconstituted as the African Union, will turn 100, and by then, there are things that we would like to have happened to have created the Africa that we want. And those 7 aspirations are the pillars upon which we are building this continent to be the continent that we want it to be. So please go online. Let no African on this continent not know what Agenda 2063 is about and what those 7 aspirations are about. And also learn the AU national anthem as well. Very, very important. Okay, so we're moving on to the next aspiration, which is aspiration number 2. And this is about an integrated continent, politically united, based on the ideals of Pan-Africanism and the vision of Africa's Renaissance. And we have 2 new guests that have joined us. And I want to welcome on my far right, His Excellency Martin Cobham, who's the acting High Commissioner for Nigeria and South Africa. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to you, sir.
Appreciate
it. Next to you, we have Mr. Tim Muriti, who is the head of Program Justice and Reconciliation in Africa at the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, but also a member of the South African Council of International Relations, which brings the voices of various segments of civil society to the foreign policy process. Welcome to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
All right, let me start with you, High Commissioner. ECOWAS really is a good example of an integration of a region. We've seen you do it on business, on security, and the movement of people. I can't think of a region that does it better than you. And I just wonder, what is it that we can learn from the ECOWAS model that we can translate to the Africa model?
Thank you very much for having me. First of all, before I proceed to answer your question, I'd like to share in your sentiments to Oliver Tambo, posthumously 100 years, and we want to congratulate you for always having a spirit behind this kind of events. Having said that, ECOWAS is the region for West Africa, much as you have SADC too. What has been the driving force for ECOWAS' success is the political will. I mean, that's sacrosanct. And of course, the people in the sub-region are more than willing to, above government, interact in terms of culture, trade, and sometimes the monetary system fuse into each other. For example, we use Naira, but just beyond our border, Benin Republic, they use the CFA. But so much we have found a kind of a common ground for both the Naira and the CFA. Even beyond the fact that we have France calling the shots among the Francophone West Africa, we have been able to overreach and adopt a system that obviates glitches and barriers. So I want to say, first of all, political will, the willingness of the leaders to see matters beyond the party in power or what have you. A recent event or occasion was the address or the option taken to resolve the issue in Gambia. The regional leaders, that is the President of Liberia, President Buhari, and others, including Saul of Senegal, were able to raid in upon Jammeh to set step aside, at least to restore normalcy and peace, rather than the option of what happened in Sierra Leone and Liberia. So we have used some of these ugly lessons of Liberia and Sierra Leone to kind of find better alternatives, so to speak, and address matters of concern in the sub-region. And I want to believe the same thing has happened in the SADC. So it's not that we have done extraordinary. I can recall during my posting in Zimbabwe, South Africa did a lot to help in the zoning of Kabila, as it were. And even Angola, Zambia, South Africa played a major role to ensure that there was a limited bloodbath in that country. Right. So I think it's a matter of comparing notes and trying to do better, or raising the bar. Having said that, I want to actually seize this opportunity because it's all about political and economic integration. Ab initio, the whole idea of OAU to AU, Pan-Africanism, has been the desire of the founding fathers. The idea of having the Casablanca bloc and Monrovia bloc coming together, coming to agree, is all aimed at African unity. So it behoves on current leaders to take the bar to the next level. And it is at this point I want to probably ruffle feathers that poor people are not immune to crime.
Okay.
That is to say, if we don't sustain this dialogue and even implement it, practicalize it, Africa will slide into perdition. And there is need in this regard. I don't mean South Africa or Nigeria. Africa must address the triple evil of poverty, unemployment, and inequality.
Okay. All right, so political will, a very, very strong word coming through there, and that we have had some successes. Before we carry on and bring in civil society, there were two questions that were asked before the break that we need to address. And the first one is public-private partnerships. We talk about them. How do we get business to join the party a lot more and help government? And also we had a young lady who said, look, you know, we're not all going to get to university, and we shouldn't all be trying to get to university. We need different skills and different kinds of education, and how do we make sure that every child has a future, and it doesn't necessarily mean his becoming an engineer or something?
Well, no Africa. Hoye Africa, hoye.
Hoye.
I have learned from engineers that for every engineer, one, you need 20 artisans. When we were young, there was schools called Ambach School. They'll translate
vocational schools, I guess. Yeah.
Yes, like the TVETs we have.
Yeah.
So yes, at the moment we have a shortage of professors. The ones we have are also on the other side above 50.
Yeah.
So we need both engineers, academicians, but we also need artisans, people who are good in cooking, so that they're not called cooks, but they are referred to as chefs. I agree fully with you. There must be space in the sun for all of us. And you have me on that one. This is partnership at work and in action. But government alone cannot do this. We are happy that Sequoia is sitting here with us. I see, you know, in Sequoia, we also have my former boss, former Deputy Minister of International Relations. Yeah, he's sitting here. And Ms. Chichima Ponya is a renowned business person. We need cash to make Sequoia work even more and better. May you find your peers to be generous in their own future, so that our council get the space in the sun, so that we continue thinking globally and acting locally. That when a businessman travels, or a businesswoman, the story he or she tells, it's an African story that's positive. That it doesn't only come from government. One script, many voices, one message. The positive message we got from the acting High Commissioner of Nigeria this morning.
Okay. In fact, I'm going to try and steal the microphone to Mr. Pahad a little bit later on, just to get a sense. I mean, if my hair's grey, His has got more wisdom than mine, so I'd like to catch some thoughts from him. But let me turn to you, Mr. Mariti. We've been hearing all along that government can't do it by itself. Private sector must also contribute. But more and more, a lot of these shifts and changes happen through civil society mobilizing. What contribution can you make to integrate this continent, do you think?
Thank you very much, Peter, and also I would like to thank Dirko for inviting us to this dialogue, and the Honourable Minister in particular for her leadership in the ministry. And I took the Minister's advice to dress properly. I've decided to flavor it up a little bit with some Pan-Africanism. Yes, I think the issue of government not doing it alone and not being expected to do it alone is extremely important. So yes, civil society, the private sector, must work hand in hand with government. Now, here is the challenge. The current climate is one in which there is a sense that this is an adversarial relationship, but it shouldn't be, because it is ultimately the one Africa that we all want as Africans and as Pan-Africanists. So let's have those difficult conversations, but let civil society, the private sector, also in a progressive and constructive way, encourage governments, our African governments across the continent, to, in fact, implement a lot of these wonderful ideas and visions that we have. Agenda 2063, and Honorable Masango mentioned Paul Kagame's report entitled The Imperative to Strengthen Our Union, and I would encourage colleagues to also Google that as they Google Agenda 2063 to see some of the very concrete recommendations within that document, which really speaks to implementation and the importance of, in fact, keeping each other in check and working towards the goals that we aspire to. One of them on the issue of strengthening the political integration of the continent and the spirit of Pan-Africanism is a little bit controversial, is the idea of an African Union passport. In fact, it already exists, and the heads of state, the ministers, and the ambassadors have it. The challenge now is for the citizens to also get it. And I think there are just a number of challenges in terms of modalities and the different countries agreeing on how this can be issued. But immediately that would open up borders for business to trade. The one fear is that economic migrants will come to the wealthier countries, but we should change the way of thinking. It also means that businesses will be able to travel to other parts of Africa, Cape to Cairo, Lusaka, Nairobi, Lagos, and really open up the continent for trade in a way that that will really begin to change, society. We heard it's only 12% of trade is being done within Africa. Most of it is with our former colonial partners in North America, Japan, and so on and so forth.
And I suppose also, the fourth industrial revolution is happening. It's happening. Exactly. We're laying the fiber optic cables on both sides of the continent, and so that the movement is going to be different in the future. Yes. It's not going to be us getting in cars and lorries, actually. It's going to be pressing buttons, and I suppose we've got to embrace that technology. Nigeria and South Africa, leading economies on the continent, and in many ways a lot of people look to both of you as the leaders in terms of getting us to that place we want to get to. You talked about love earlier on. How do we get rid of these borders in our heads that were created, that we've seen some unfortunate incidents from time to time here in South Africa and other parts of the continent as well, that we can start to, I think of Nigeria. Hausa in Niger is the same as Hausa in Nigeria. How do we get to dissolve these borders in our heads so that when we look at each other, we look at ourselves, and hopefully that changes our behavior? Let me put that to you, South Africa and Nigeria.
Well, let me help the ambassador first and just say that it's a historical fact that the best Pan-Africanist leaders and fighters that fought for decolonization of this continent happened to be women. Queen Mantati Simutoko from the Free State, the Queen in Angola, who fought the Portuguese invaders. So even on these things of love, that's why it's very difficult to think or make South Africa xenophobic, because we don't have camps where we keep foreigners. You will find them in our homes. They are our sons-in-law, sisters-in-law. Tribalism had never worked on the continent with women. It only works during the day when men want to be elected. That's why tribalism is very difficult in my household. Because my father was in Ndebele, my mother is Pedi. I have Pedi children and Shangan children who also have roots in Mozambique, from a father whose great-grandparents were descendants of Soshangan, who originally came from KZN. So we are basically one people. While His Excellency is getting ready to respond to this, I think the telltale evidence was when we were looking for Chibok girls from Nigeria. And the fact that there's Lake Chad, where even colonizers couldn't deal with the forests around Lake Chad. So as they demarcated, they just couldn't do anything. They say by 2 o'clock you need a torch to walk around in that bush. So Africans have always been one people. But through intermarriages and women wanting to champion unity of our continent, this voice of unity had kept on. 4.5 years of Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma at the African Union, at the helm of the African Union Commission, had made a difference of 40 years in 4.5 years.
Wow.
You agree? I thought you were going to clap to that. In Malaysia, Malaysia became independent in 1956. It took them the tragedy of 1969 to work for the socio-economic inclusion of the Bumiputra, or the indigenous people. 40 years later, they are back to one Malaysia because it worked for both people of Malay origin, of Chinese origin, of Indian origin. So 40 years, it's a lifetime, Peter.
Yeah, no, you're right.
It can be done,
it can.
Particularly with the 4th industrial revolution you referred to earlier on. No amount of digitization and ICT will take the place of people-to-people interaction.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. I think I will take off from the Minister's last statement, that is people-to-people enhanced relations, so to speak. And I am sometimes uncomfortable, much as my president will use the word xenophobia. When he came last to South Africa on an event of FOCAC, I gave him a speech. He said, I'd rather use the word civil disobedience.
Can I just ask you to raise your voice just a little bit? Yeah.
So I was saying that the whole idea of xenophobia, from the point of Madam Minister, I want to align with her, is a mindset. It's something that has to do on account of limited exposure and travel between South Africa and Nigeria. Because if you look at it the other way, we have 10 flights from Tambo Airport to Lagos. That is 7 to Lagos, 3 to Abuja. And these aircrafts are not moving goods, as it were, but human beings. You wonder, what are those human beings going to look for? Vice versa. That means there is no xenophobia between these two human beings. It is an irritant that subsists in South Africa, so to speak, on account of, will I say, misguided or transferred anger. To a large extent, it's basically unemployment and lack of something to occupy you. As Madam Minister has said, there is a lot of intermarriages between Nigeria and South Africa, and even beyond, so to speak, you know. And let me be a bit humorous. Madam Minister may not agree with me. I want to see the next 10 years, you might have Bafana, first 11, at least 7 will be Nigerians, as it were. Then in your parliament...
Instead of playing for France or England.
In the parliament, you might have Nigerians the next 20 years as MPs. But of course, they will be South Africans, they will not be Nigerians. We will be hearing South African of Nigerian descent. So,
and that is America's story.
Yes,
actually.
And let me just progress further. Madam Minister said, women have always been at the forefront of emancipation of the continent. And I cannot agree less. In Nigeria, we have Queen Amina. In Zimbabwe, Ambassador will agree with me, Ambuya Nehanda.
Yes.
And of course, a lot more other. Women have actually been the arrowhead. If you look into this room, women are more African dressed than the men. When Madam Minister came in, I thought a Nigerian minister was coming in. Same with Madam Chichi Maponya. But the men are all here with ties. So who is now taking the African flag further? It is the women. So we want to challenge or urge the women, particularly the young ladies over there, to have the African thinking, to have ourselves, our mind liberated. We must see things beyond hearsay. When these eruptions starts, it's because of what people want us to do, because of misconception. Let me digress, and I'm sure you're not comfortable with my next statement. Drug pushing. How do a Nigerian come in here and start selling drugs if there are no drug barons that supply the drugs? Secondly, a Nigerian cannot come to South Africa and know Guguletu or Kailisha. A South African takes him there to sell the drug. He takes it to Tango. So this irritation, this misconception, this annoyance, it's something that we have to address and then remove it. Thirdly and finally, there are no frontiers or barriers in Africa. It is a colonial conception. Africans have been moving, crossed rivers, moved over mountains. We have the Ndebeles that left here after the Mfukane of Shaka Zulu and went as far as Zimbabwe. I mean, Mzilikazi and Lobengula went that north. And we have even some Shona, so to speak, in South Africa and even beyond. So it is like the Fulani cattle rearer that comes from Senegal all the way to Cameroon and, will I say, Sudan. So Africa, there has been a oneness, but it is left to us to promote and further this oneness. In other words, this dialogue must be sustained. And I want to thank the Minister for creating the platform. Thank you again.
All right, so civil society, I mean, this is where it really all happens, actually. I mean, I think the politicians can create policy, ease visa regulations, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, this human-to-human contacts having at civil society level, how do we, all of us, become African first?
That's a very important question. And I agree with you, it's ultimately about people-to-people relations. But governments play an incredibly important role because they have the taxes that they collect from the people, and they have the ability to move those resources. And we talk about the funding for the African Union, for example. It's governments that have to send that money to the AU, not citizens, because the citizens have already paid their taxes. And it's good to see that the African Union is now examining a policy of self-financing 0.2% on eligible imports, which will be transmitted directly to the African Union to enable it to do all the work that it needs to do on the African continent, which will generate about $500 million a year. So that type of resource then becomes the platform for encouraging these people-to-people contacts and for encouraging, greater business enterprise and low and small, medium-sized enterprises across the continent. And I think it's important for us as we celebrate O.R. Tambo to also remember when he went out to literally build the ANC, he had nothing. He simply had the power of his ideas and his ability to convey a message. And he constructed the ANC into the entity that led to the liberation of South Africa in 1994. And we, as African citizens, must learn from O.R. Tambo, other African leaders, Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, Julius Nyerere, for their ability to activate and do what was necessary to get to where they needed to get to. And so, yes, people to people, we still need the spaces to be opened for African citizens to do what is necessary. Just think of the visa restrictions. It really is a serious issue. How many of us could be doing work at the civil society level, at the business level, if simply we didn't have these restrictions on the continent? It really takes too much time. It takes a lot of energy. The gender issue has come in, and I think that's incredibly important. Women working even across these so-called artificial borders of ours. And there's an initiative by civil society actors, I should mention, which is called Africans Rising for Justice, Equality, and Dignity. And one of its aspirations is really to get a mobilization of 1 billion Africans to really take charge of our destiny and work hand in hand, as I mentioned, with key other important actors like government and our intergovernmental organizations like the AU and ECOWAS.
All right, so I'm going to start mixing things up a little bit. Peace and security is also another important issue, but also this, I'm getting a sense that for Africa to succeed, there needs to be this cooperation. And we saw it during the liberation years under the OAU. The ANC was in Tanzania, was in Zambia, was in Lesotho, was in Angola. ZANU, ZAPU, we're in Mozambique, we're in Zambia, Tanzania. So there were countries that cooperated to liberate this continent. There wasn't an issue of, that's your problem, sort it out yourself. There was a collectiveness. And I'm just wondering, now we've entered the AU era. We do see these interventions, but how do we foster that cooperation in the same way as it was before, where there was no question that we helped each other? How do we do that? I've seen interventions in Lesotho recently, and that you've mentioned Burkina Faso. How do we OAUize the AU?
Well, Peter, Africans have always had this generosity of spirit of welcoming guests. When I was young, and I see Deputy Minister is agreeing with me, when you have guests, if they arrive late at night and you had already prepared dinner, we give all the food to the guests and we pretend as if we are fine, even if we're hungry. And the best bedroom gets handed over to the guests. That's the generosity of spirit. That has been like that from OEU days and AU days. But this generosity of spirit has always also been taken advantage of. During OR's time, during Mandela's time, during President Mbeki's time, now in the era of President Jacob Zuma and many other leaders on the continent. Some friends we have beyond the borders take us very, very seriously, and they want to engage with us. Some think we need to be told, almost like even a traditional healer, throw some bones on the floor before he or she start diagnosing. Some think they can just look at you and tell you what you're suffering from and that which you need to fix. when we say African people need to become their own liberators, is that when we urge for support from our friends, as OR did, it doesn't mean they must come dictate to us on how we should eat, how we should sleep, how we should run our governments and our democracies, and so on and so on. Peter, I can say without fear of contradicting myself that we were never left alone. And 100 years cannot be a yardstick of determining how we have resolved all our problems. When Africa was invaded from 1400s to much earlier, more than 400 years of invasion, and we are expected to have sorted out all our problems in less than 100 years, I think that's a bit unfair. That's why I was saying, I think we've done a lot, but we need not sit on our laurels, because no one else from outside is ever going to take us anywhere where we want to go. One leader was reminding me over the weekend in my home province, I do go back to my village regularly, that Africa, talking geographic land size, is 12 times India. 12 times in terms of land. So we still have a lot we can do with our arable land to feed Africans so that we stop being the net importer of food produce and become a net exporter, because we've always been like that. We can achieve this if we work together.
Okay.
Working together, we can do more as Africans.
So we're running out of time, and I'm literally going to ask all of you one final comment. Africa Day, and you've got 40 seconds each, literally, just your final message. For all of our African citizens that are watching this dialogue, what would you most like them to take away from our conversation? Let me start with you, Your Excellency.
You said 40 seconds?
40 seconds, yes.
Okay. Walk the talk. Walk the talk, enough of the talk shop.
Right.
We now have to implement. Thank you.
That's brilliant. I love that. Thank you so much.
I can borrow some of the seconds from you.
Yes, okay.
It's very important that we have our young learners here.
Yeah.
I think that's extremely important. I congratulate NOM Africa for standing up and speaking from that perspective. They are the ones that will witness the fulfillment of Agenda 2063.
Right.
Now, the challenge is actually to revive that spirit of Pan-Africanism, Peter, that you spoke about, that was lacking. And that means, in fact, within our educational system, have that teaching of that Pan-Africanism, have the engagement across borders, and really, encourage people to think of themselves not as part of these small constructs that were left behind by our colonial empires, but in fact part of something much bigger. And when we work as one, we really can achieve a lot.
Okay, fantastic. 30 seconds.
United in our diversity, let's continue working together as one Africa. Africa, hoye.
Oh yeah, Africa. And that's where we're going to have to leave it. Thank you very much indeed for being part of this dialogue. And don't forget, Agenda 2063 is about you. It's not some document that's sitting in Addis Ababa. It's yours. From us, though, have a great day. Happy Africa Day, everybody. Asante sana, kwaheri.
Asante sana.
Well, a very good morning and welcome to AM News Live at 1000 hours across all Central Africa regions.
A fitting send-off for a revolutionary giant.
a life dedicated in service of the people.
The result means that the Swallows are out of the ABC Municipal League and drop to the amateur fourth tier of South African football, the SAB League.
Tune in on AM News every Saturday and Sunday from 10 hours.
On Network, we tell you about Africa's social media and technology landscape. 21st century economies rely on technology to truly thrive.
We have quite a comprehensive portfolio of interventions in the tech entrepreneurship space.
And Africans are using tech and social media to solve the continent's unique challenges.
App Nigeria is an online marketplace.
Radio Vibe is a social media platform for radio music.
That's Network with me, Phumelele Zondi, every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. Central African Time.
Good afternoon, it's just gone 12 midday. Thanks for joining us on Africa Day. You're with SABC News. Good to have you with us. Coming up in your headlines, President Jacob Zuma is expected to host an Africa Day celebration at Sefako Makgato Presidential Guest House in Pretoria. We'll take you to that as soon as it gets underway. Also, the IFP has secured a landslide victory in the Mputu by-elections in KwaZulu-Natal. And then taking a look at your sports news, Manchester United preserves Jose Mourinho's 100% record in European finals, winning the only trophy missing from their collection. All right, well, let's get straight into it. Africa Day is a celebration of the day the Organization of African Unity, the precursor to the African Union, was formed in 1963. Today, we acknowledge the progress that we as Africans have made while reflecting upon the common challenges we face in a global environment. Africans have